Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining today's webinar, IT Hacks for HR, Automate the Work, Not the People. Our panelists for today are Gavin Hay, President and Co-founder of Dispatch Integrations, Mike Vox, Manager of People Operations over at Gainsight, and Workado's own Jesslyn Klein, Head of People and Culture. My name is Nick. I'm on the business development team here at Workado, and I'll be moderating the session today and helping to manage the Q&A during the discussion. Really excited to get us kicked off, but before I turn the mic over to our host, Gavin, for further introductions and discussion framing, just a couple of admin notes to pose the group. So from a time management perspective, I think the webinar today is scheduled to run for a full half hour. Being mindful of your time, we'll work behind the scenes to make sure that we land right at that 1 hour mark. The session will be recorded and provided to the attendees for review after the session. So if you're unable to attend the full hour, that's fine. We'll provide the recording to you to review at a later time. In terms of the style for the presentation, so we've designed the session to be as organic as possible, right? And so with that, we've minimized the slideware to effectively 0, or what you see on the screen, and have instead kind of committed to a more conversational fireside chat approach, where Gavin will pose a series of questions to our panelists and also engage in a conversation flow that's a little bit less prescriptive and more organic. So with that, if you do have any questions for the panelists or the host, please do post them in the Q&A chat, and we will raise them to the panelists as they come up. And so with that, Aaron, unless I missed anything, Gavin, I can turn over to you for deeper introductions to get the conversation going.
Very good. Thanks, Nicholas. I'm Gavin. I'm going to be hosting today, but before I introduce myself any further, I'll let Mike and Jesslyn introduce themselves. So Mike, why don't you introduce yourself and just tell everyone a little bit about where you're from and what you do.
Yeah, so again, I'm Mike, and I work at a company called Gainsight, which is a customer success platform. And there's about 700 employees here, and I've been at Gainsight for 2.5 years. And specifically, I work on people operations related stuff. So that's a little bit of compensation. It's a little bit of managing our HR stack and operations. And it's a little bit of reporting and analytics.
Fantastic. And Jesslyn, how about you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Jesslyn. I have been at Workado all of 6 months now. I was one of the excited people to join the team in the midst of COVID. So it's been an interesting experience so far. And I've really been very blessed with actually joining an automation and integration company because there is so much work, both in the midst of COVID as well as ongoing as organizations mature, that I end up getting a lot of help from automations with our platform. So my role and focus at Workado is really on all things people and culture. And so what that means is we look at our people organization as 3 essential parts. We really have an HR and sort of compliance, legal side, comp and benefits. Then we have our people operations team that is really sort of the backbone for all of the aspects of what we do with our people and gets everyone running and up to speed with all of the aspects of the operations that they need. And then my role is really somewhere in between the two, where I help the HR side of things interface with the people operations team to make sure everything that we're doing is really as much aligned with the culture that we're trying to create and then scale over time. And then there's a little bit of a piece where there's kind of a feedback loop where I'm keeping a pulse on what's going on in the organization and then going back to our HR and people ops side of things to tweak things as we go. So that's a little bit about me.
Fantastic. So we can see we've got some panelists today which are represent different aspects of the same sort of organization, all oriented around HR. I'm going to introduce myself a little bit further. So my name is Gavin Hay. I am the president and CTO of Dispatch Integration. We're a very proud partner of Workado and have been a partner now for several years. And we are very pleased to be able to represent Workado in the marketplace and helping organizations do exactly what we're talking about today, really optimize their HR processes and automate, as the title of the presentation today talks about, automate the work out so that people can really focus on the value add in their organization. So enough about myself. I want to bring this back to the two of you, Jesslyn and Mike. We talked about people ops for just a minute. Can we maybe describe kind of what the mandate is for people ops and how you see that in your organization and how that supports your growth and the strategies, your strategic strategies at your organizations? Mike, how
Yeah.
about we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting because people operations means something different at every company. And, I like to think that our people operations is pretty progressive and pretty strategic. So I think what we tend to focus on is number one, making data-driven decision making. So, to touch on that strategic aspect. Additionally, we focus on creating great employee experiences throughout the entire life cycle. And we also focus on making sure that our employees are always engaged and present. Specifically, I think my role is more around creating business enablement. So I work to make sure that all of our operations can scale and also make sure that all of our employees feel supported throughout the entire life cycle.
Well, fantastic. And Jesslyn, with your perspective, can you maybe describe people operations and how you interact with that part of your organization?
Yeah, so actually the piece that Mike, you said about sort of really focusing on employee enablement, that piece rings very true for our people ops team at Workato as well. As mentioned, I collaborate daily, regularly with the people ops team to really ensure that we're constantly problem solving and solutioning to ensure that that enablement piece is there, because ultimately that does really help with employee experience. So our people operations team, I like to think of me as kind of the eyes and ears and sometimes the executioner of our strategy from a cultural standpoint. And it's really our people operations team that's essentially the central nervous system of how do we get work done and what do we have in place to make sure employees have what they need to be able to manage their jobs well.
I think that's really interesting, Jesslyn, to talk about really the human aspect of technology. When you were presenting as part of a work automation group, but really kind of coming back again to the title of today's session, which is really automating the work out, but not the people out of the process. And I think that's really critical. And I think that's a really interesting perspective and valuable perspective, that it's not just technology for technology's sake, that it actually is tied to concrete business objectives. So as we're exploring these business objectives, they can be expressed through the application stack that you have at your organizations. So Mike, can you describe, when you talk about people or people ops, people start to think about, okay, well, maybe I've got an HR app, but what is the rest of the stack that comprises your HR operations?
Yeah, so I'm fortunate enough to be in a very progressive thinking company where we actually do a lot of scoping of numerous HR systems. So I get to see a lot, but I think the major ones here that we use are going to be UltiPro as our HRIS. We use Greenhouse as our ATS, and for communication and collaboration, we use Slack. For engagement, we use CultureAmp. For performance, we use Reflective, and there's numerous other tools we use. And to put in a plug here, I would say that Workato is actually the tool that helps us bring everything together and leverage it in its best fashion.
Excellent. So Jesslyn, being at Workato itself, maybe talk about the stack that you guys see at your organization.
Yeah, believe it or not, we use Workato here as well. And we also use Greenhouse. So there's some commonality there, Mike. And I think we're similar in the sense that we're pretty heavily involved in Slack on a regular basis. That's both from a little bit of an engagement side as well as a communication side. And we actually do quite a bit of work management in Slack because of some of the work bots that we've built out with Workato. For some of the other elements, we have soon to be Namely for our HRMS, and then we use SurveyMonkey to really get some data and insights from the employees on a regular basis.
Yeah, so it sounds like you both have real, fairly substantial ecosystems of apps that really contribute to meeting your organizational objectives, whether it be like you talked about CultureAmp, encouraging, the human culture aspect of your organization, or whether it be compensation oriented, or even your applicant tracking. With talent, being at a premium, I think it's really important that we, find those best of breed applications to help us achieve those goals. So with this ecosystem of applications, Mike, how do you handle all of those apps, and what are the challenges that you've had to overcome with that?
Yeah, so we try to plug in Workato wherever we can, but I think some of the biggest challenges we had over the last, since I've been here anyways, are we have a lot of manual data entry, we have a lot of inaccurate data, and we don't really have a global experience for all of our employees. And I'm talking about onboarding throughout, onboarding to the entire life cycle. And we've really focused on using automation to solve these challenges. And we created a project that, first looked at confirming what our source of truth is. And the way that I look at this data project is that before you can build the second and third layers or the second and third floors of a house, you really need to make sure that the foundation and the first floor of the house is accurate and is exactly what you need it to be before you start layering on, for instance, integrations to other systems downstream. So what we focused on firsthand was making sure at the very beginning that we were automating the flow of information from our ATS, which is Greenhouse again, over to UltiPro. And once we felt very confident that there was no manual work there, we moved on to other processes that we could improve. And some of those included the automation of provisioning. So we actually send information to the right teams when they need it just in time. So for instance, when a candidate starts, information that needs to get to finance gets to finance, information that needs to get to IT gets to IT, and so on. So those are two of the major things. And then I also want to talk about something that we did to ensure data integrity, which is create an actual Slack channel where before all the information gets sent downstream to UltiPro Core or to UltiPro Core source of truth, we have a verification of that information by our teammate success team, which allows us to reject anything if there's any errors. And then finally, something that we're currently working on, which would again help with that global experience, is that a lot of our employees in our India population don't currently onboard in UltiPro. They're actually onboarding in a Google spreadsheet, and then we have somebody manually bringing that data over to UltiPro. So what we've actually done with Workato is that we've moved that Google spreadsheet inside the actual UltiPro onboarding module and then integrated it to UltiPro Core. So again, the goal is long-term to have that unified onboarding experience where all employees can onboard in our HRES.
Oh, that's excellent. So a couple of themes coming out of there that to kind of distill it down is that you ought to make sure that your data is correct. Your data validation is crucial. And so that when you get to people analytics and making sure that you are measuring your journey on your objectives, that you get that right. And a couple of years ago when I was looking at kind of the big data field, everyone kept saying, you got to make sure you look at your small data first. And it sounds like that's what you're really, really focusing on so that you know that your data quality is high. Jess, you maybe tell me a little bit about some of the optimizations and automations that you've put together at Workato. I would expect nothing than the best from you guys.
So sometimes we definitely have plenty of lessons learned, and luckily we get a lot of time to experiment with it because it is something that we know and manage a lot in-house. I would say one recently is actually even a little bit right before onboarding, the candidate experience. We know that candidates' first interaction with us as a company really starts to sort of set the tone for what their experience is going to be like and helps to manage sort of their expectations throughout the process. And it's not just on the candidate side, then it's also on our entire hiring team. So anyone that's involved in the candidate experience, they're both there to help ensure we're, of course, making the right hiring decisions, but also making sure it's as pleasant a candidate experience as possible. And we want to make sure that that's manageable for the people that are involved in hiring. So one of our most recent projects was actually on how do we automate aspects of Greenhouse and tying that into the way that our hiring team does their work. So we connected Greenhouse with with Slack, as well as calendars and email. We use G Suite for a lot of our activities. And so one of the biggest pieces that we were very aware of, and I'll be really realistic here, when we're in a rapid hiring phase, and especially being remote, you don't get to see candidates walk in the front door. You don't get to have someone tap you on your shoulder and say, hey, you know, Cecile is coming in next. So what we actually built out to make sure our hiring managers were able to be present on time and really focused on the person in front of them when they're interviewing is we the day before now have an automation that lets the hiring manager know, hey, this is coming. Here's the position. Here's the information that you need to know about the job description, the criteria we're looking for. And just so you know, here's the access to the scorecard that you're going to need after you complete the interview. That's there the day before. Some people like to have a little bit of prep time in advance. Some people like to have prep time 10 minutes before. So we've also built in another automation that does something similar, but actually pops right up in Slack, brings them to both the calendar event as well as the application in Greenhouse, so that our hiring managers is, again, very aware and has fresh on their mind what is the position that they're hiring for, what is their role in the process, what insights are we looking for from them, and that way they show up to the meeting on time. They know the candidate, they've reviewed their resume, and they really know what to hone in on and focus on with that candidate so that they can make sure it's as productive a conversation as possible. And then my last and not least favorite part by any means is I'm often involved in chasing people down to get scorecards and information and feedback. We've actually automated that piece as well. So we have a human element to it where I'll absolutely reach out to people directly if they still haven't responded, but we do now have automated scorecard reminders the day of the interview, the day after, and then up to 3 days after that. So that really helps us stay on track and be present as much as possible in the hiring process.
I think that's really interesting, and I think there's a bit of a contrast too in terms of when we talk about automation and integration between the two use cases. One's very people-oriented, reminders, scheduling, making sure that data is at top of mind and activities are followed up on. And on the other side, from a data perspective, Mike, and what you're doing at Gainsight, where you're bringing data together to help you achieve your global data integration strategy. I want to ask a question about that. When you were building these interfaces and building these automations, did you feel like it was a burdensome activity that you kind of had one chance to do it right and that was it? Or was it something that you felt you could iterate on and refine and react to feedback from the teams that were involved? Maybe I'll start with you, Jessalyn, because you had very people-oriented automations. Do you feel that the Ricado tool was able to react to changing requirements and changing feedback from the user community?
Yeah, that's one of the things I've really enjoyed has been that it is not super IT centric. You don't need to have a whole lot of IT background to be able to manage it. We actually have people on our people ops team that does the recipe building themselves. And so that's really nice because they're people with a bit of an HR people lens to things so that they can kind of start out with a blueprint of what is it that we're looking to accomplish with this recipe. And then from there, as they get data points from the hiring managers, from the candidates, as they're going through the process, or from me, we're able to go back and really rework things. And sometimes it's just really simple changes in the recipe that take a matter of minutes to update. And then you get to try that out for the next interview moving forward. So it does tend to be sort of you got to start somewhere and you put, you throw spaghetti at the wall the first time, but then you can go back and retweak things, and it's a really interactive and collaborative process that makes it really well suited for us.
And I think that's exactly what we've seen as a partner, and when we're involved in helping organizations build out their interfaces and build out their automations, it's tightly iterative, making sure that you're following the process over and over, checking in with the user community. It's not a big lift to make a change. It's within reach and it's easy to do. So it's not intimidating. Mike, I want to give you an opportunity to react to that question as well, just in terms of its flexibility, in terms of how you can roll out an interface and a data feed.
Yeah, so I would say it's also highly collaborative, and if you think you're going to do something right 100% the first time, you're fooling yourself. So I know that because we don't actually have sandboxes with our ATS and our HRIS, we really did want to get it right the first time. So we spent numerous hours scoping and thinking about everything that could potentially go right or wrong. But there was always more. So it becomes that iterative process, and it becomes that process where things that you couldn't possibly think show up, they do show up. So you are going to have to go back to the drawing board, and you really need the flexibility that Workato allows you to kind of tweak things as you go.
Okay, excellent. So interestingly, Jessalyn, you brought up about how you joined. You joined Workato during COVID. Everyone's remote. Like you said, you're not going in through the door, and you're not, seeing people in person as much as we were previously. How do you see Workato supporting security and privacy compliance concerns? Obviously, if you've got a badge, you can walk through the door. That's one level of privacy. But when we're all working from home, how do you see Workato assisting with that transition that we've all gone through?
Yeah, that really makes a huge difference and is a big relief for us at Workato. So we tend to be sort of visual and physical as human beings. And so we remember things when we have visual cues. And so you'll remember someone from the candidate experience, and you'll have sort of a sense of their role and who that person is and what kind of access they should have. And then you can kind of sort of get those cues to jog your memory when you're meeting with them on their first day. Versus when you're fully remote, being able to connect all of those different pieces and even having aspects of onboarding that happens before you're interfacing with the new hire, it's super easy to make mistakes. So Mike, you can probably empathize with some of that. And so what we've really benefited from is having as much of the onboarding and apps provisioning and deprovisioning process automated as possible. Once people are categorized as particular levels with different access in various different systems, and we have sort of a blueprint that gets tweaked for each particular role in our org, a lot of what Workato does behind the scenes with IT checking in and doing tweaks as needed and collaborating with HR, a lot of that is really pretty standardized, so that when the employee shows up virtually on their first day, they have their apps provisioned, and we have a pretty good sense of confidence that they're going to have the apps that they need. And then similarly, when it's time for them to exit the organization, whether it's a planned or unplanned aspect of the process, we're really quickly able to communicate with the rest of the HR team as well as IT to make sure what they had access to before, they no longer have access to, and that is really well timed so that there are no gaps from a security standpoint. That again just provides some relief for us on the people side of things, and security likes it a lot as well on our team. So,
Mike, what are your thoughts around this topic around security, privacy, and really controls around what people can do and have access to?
Yeah, so security is always on us to make sure we're as safe as possible, and privacy rules and laws are being followed. So I think one of the things that was the benefit of this project was that it prevents people who shouldn't have access to have the data from actually accessing it. So when we set up these automations and integrations, we're able to do that. But also, aside from that, we were able to set up these provisioning emails to our different provisioning teams that I talked about, IT, finance, and more. And it really prevents them from having the generic information that they don't actually need. So before this, we might have had one provisioning email for all these teams. So finance might see information that they don't need to see, or IT might see information that they don't need to see. So this really helped with that. Additionally, in the future, much like Jessalyn was talking about, we are looking into role-based access. So the goal is to kind of have people with certain permissions and certain access based off of their level or role in the company.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So to kind of recap, we kind of cover kind of three bottom line outcomes really from how Workato can support your organization. It's going to support your employee experience, like you said, Jessalyn, day one experiences. Mike, what you talked about in terms of global onboarding experiences, being able to provide a consistent, predictable process that not only the new employees can depend on, but also managers know that wherever they go, the employees have had that similar experience. Number two is with an ecosystem of applications. You guys have talked about a number of apps that you have in your ecosystem, even just in people ops. Workato can improve the efficiency of provisioning. It can improve the efficiency of sharing data, making sure that data entered in one system arrives in the next system efficiently and effectively, and like to your point, Mike, correctly. And then finally, really the security and privacy aspect of how only the right people get the right data at the right time. And apps by themselves can move that forward so far, but when you have an ecosystem of apps, keeping that all under control can be challenging. What are your thoughts around kind of this triple bottom line idea, Mike and Jesslyn? Why don't I start with you, Mike?
Yeah, so it's amazing how all three are interconnected. I mean, if you do one, you're actually doing the other two, and vice versa. So I think initially our first goals are really around efficiency and scalability, but in turn, we really did touch all three. So again, it was, creating those better experiences for global onboarding, getting rid of all of the manual work and information and manual time spent correcting stuff, and having the added benefit of having just the right people accessing the right data at the right time. So while we didn't start with all three as a goal, we just ended up there. So we're really excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, each supports the other. Jesslyn, do you have any thoughts on how these three pieces all come together?
Yeah, I mean, for us, the integration and the automation piece, I don't know that I'm adding anything new here, but really to your point, Mike, as much as possible, when we can eliminate human error, essentially, it's a natural part of being human. We're going to make mistakes. And so when there are integration and automations, as well as sort of double checks and gates that people have to go through in every process, that allows us to ensure that there's some accuracy to what we're doing. And then I think the other piece of it that really stands out for us is because we have not only that accuracy, but then that simplification, which I know is another point, Mike, that you brought to the surface there. Having things simplified as much as possible allows you to really focus on the human aspect of everything that we're doing. And so less of your brain is caught into the nitty gritty of really what is more manual work, and more of your brain and your whole self is able to focus on actually showing up. So those are sort of my thoughts there to that, Kevin.
Right. That's excellent. So we've talked a lot about business objectives. We've talked about how it's changed the employee experience. We've talked about automation. And we did touch briefly on Workato as a tool for a couple minutes. I'd like to come back to Workato now and talk about it as a tool, as a technology that helped unlock these things. We talked before about how it allows for iterative development. What other aspects of Workato has really changed the way you've approached these types of process automations? And has it unlocked things that you wouldn't have considered before otherwise? Mike, maybe I'll start with you just on that topic.
Yeah, so I think we definitely have unlocked a lot of things that we didn't know was possible at first. Part of it for us was we didn't really understand the capabilities at first, so we learned a lot as we went. Specifically, though, I wanted to kind of talk about why Workato has been important for us. So at the very top level, like all of us have an HR stack, and we have all these systems within the HR stack. And while they may be perfect to some degree, they're imperfect for us, and they're imperfect for every business. So every business has different business rules and business processes, which don't necessarily align with the stack and the systems the way they are. So we really need something to kind of help us bridge those gaps. And Workato was that tool for us. So with Workato, we're kind of able to customize these systems into, again, exactly what our business use cases are. So that's been great. Specifically, we've done a ton of work around integration stuff and automation with Workato. And I kind of think of Workato as being the tool that made us more of a smart HR stack and a smart HR system, because we're able to really talk to everything now, and everything is connected. So that's how I would think about it.
Okay, cool. So just like, when we start talking about Workato as a technology and as a tool, you're fairly new to Workato, having joined it a few months ago. Um, what has your journey in terms of understanding what is possible and how with those automation projects that you've been involved with, how did that change your perspective with a tool like Workato?
Yeah, I'm actually always surprised by what Workato can do, and it's not always just Workato as a product. I guess I want to call out, Gavin, probably to what you do in your day-to-day job, as well as members on our people ops team, and Mike, probably you too. It's also the what we call them chefs, going with the analogy of building recipes with Workato, but it's the combination of the chef and the power of the product. And that really, I've noticed with Workato, allows us to think outside the box, so that it's not just, hey, we set things up a certain way because that's how every other HR org has done that over the history of time. Instead, it's, okay, let's take a clear look at an employee experience and our goals as a company. And let's look at some of the areas where maybe those touch points or those experiences are not as ideal as they could be, or they're creating barriers that aren't helping people get their work done and perform at their best. And then being able to apply sort of those data points and feedback with the chefs and then the product with Workato to really solve for those problems in a very creative way. And I'm always surprised when we have a problem, I'll ask, hey, can we automate this? Can we build a recipe with this? And the answer almost inevitably is yes. And even if it's not yes, apparently at the get-go, usually some tweaking and sort of cooking in the kitchen ends up resulting in us being able to do way more than we thought we could, and just more efficiently.
Yeah, and I'll echo that, just as as part of our Workato practice, where we are working with a variety of customers to achieve those same goals, and we see exactly the same thing. We are able to work closer with the business teams, which they can really understand what we're trying to automate. When we walk people through the recipes that we've been building, people get it. They can see it, they can understand it. It's not hidden behind all kinds of APIs and code and JSON and JavaScript and all of that really cool stuff. Don't get me wrong, that's really cool stuff. I love that stuff. But when we are working with our customers who are looking for business outcomes, being able to work really closely together and working iteratively and speaking the language of business as we're building integrations is really crucial, and something that has actually changed the way that we engage with our customers. And I think that Workato is a game changer, A, from a technology perspective, but B, also in terms of a process and what is the art of the possible. It really changes that playbook. So Mike, you mentioned it before, you have constraints with different systems. Sometimes you have a test system, sometimes you don't. And you had to work through those problems. Not everything goes smoothly the first time. So can you maybe share some experiences and some lessons that you've learned as you've rolled out new automations and integrations in your environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a great question. I think the first point that you mentioned is that things don't always go smoothly. So we've had to go back to the drawing board multiple times for multiple iterations. Again, but the tool itself is flexible and allows us to do that. I do think that the overarching principle, again, that I talked about before, was that every system itself does not exactly fit your business process. So you're really going to need something to kind of shore up those gaps, definitely. In addition to that, like, things that I've learned are, one, I think is very important, is that you need to be really thoughtful about the foundation of data and your source of truth, because it impacts so much downstream. So you definitely want to bring in people from finance and IT and recruiting and other parts of the company early to make sure that everything is squared away and you are all on the same page, definitely. And then one more thing would be, I feel like HR work, especially when it comes to the ops space, it never ends. So HR automation, while we do project after project, it's something that should go on forever. So if it does go on forever, you really need to celebrate the wins that you get from each little project.
It's not a set it and forget it type of environment. It's a constantly evolve as your organization evolves type of situation, right?
Exactly, you got it.
Yeah. So I'm just going to take the last couple of minutes, Jessalyn, to before we go to some of the questions, to also, react to, what lessons have you learned in terms of what Workato can do, and then how you went through that process, and what did you learn? What are the things that you went, ooh, that worked well, or oh, I know better next time?
Yeah, I can wrap this up, I think, in one major lesson, which is that we can and should often automate about 80 to 90% of what we do. And then there's about 10% of it that we actually shouldn't automate. The 80 to 90% of what we automate is intended for data integrity, efficiency, and then really feeding the bandwidth that we have as a human team to focus on those touch points in the employee experience that really matter for those to be with people and not bots. And so I think my biggest lesson has been for things related to communication, first experiences, last experiences in the employee life cycle, aspects related to difficult conversations and feedback. Those are all things that we really need our entire HR team and our leadership team to be really fully engaged and have the bandwidth to be able to focus on. And then the 80 to 90% of it that's more manual, more repetitive and administrative, that should be automated. So I think that's kind of the biggest lesson that I've taken away from all of this.
Awesome. That's really great feedback. So before we go to some questions, so I encourage anyone with any questions to please enter them into the Q&A. And then we'll take some questions, and Mike and Jessalyn and I can react to those. But before we do that, I just want to kind of leave some parting thoughts. Cameron has, the CEO of Dispatch, has put together a blog post that he's shared that really outlines kind of 4 key aspects that, from our perspective, that we felt were really important. I wanted to leave everyone with today. One is you start with integration, meaning moving data, the small data between systems, and breaking up and doing those small integrations at the very base, I think is absolutely foundational. Moving then from moving data to moving processes, in other words, automating, making sure that you've got people reacting to events and people reacting to processes. Once you've got those small pieces, both in data and in automation and human workflows, you can start to bring all of those together for orchestrations. And that's really where you get onboarding experiences, where you go from data capture, when someone is captured as a candidate, for example, in an ATS like Greenhouse, all the way through the recruiting experience, where Justin was talking about the automations for reminders and, scorecard captures, all of those pieces. And then all the way through, back to Mike's example of Greenhouse, and then bringing the data into UltiPro, but hitting Slack first to ensure that data is correct. And that, to me, is really an orchestration of that full experience. And you can't get there until you've done kind of those first 2 pieces. Finally, all of these things then go through a life cycle of simplification. And that's one of the things that we've seen too with, as we've helped organizations build out their Workato ecosystem with their applications, is that you start with one thing, you can iterate on it very quickly, and you end up actually simplifying your processes because you've now really understood what your processes are. And you can automate out your inefficiencies and really narrow down what your people tasks are to really the things that you want people to be focused on. So I just wanted to leave that with you. Aaron has put a link to that blog post from Cam on today's chat window. And I just wanted to open up the floor, and if anyone had any questions, they can put into the QA screen, and to help people start to talk a little bit about some of the questions. So do we have any questions yet? I'm just looking. So I do see a question here, and this is actually an excellent question that we get all the time. So the question is, if we don't have the most modern applications, can we still use Workato to help with process automation? This is a fabulous question, and actually something that we get all the time. In fact, earlier this week, I was on a phone call with a customer had exactly the same question. So most modern applications can be described as having APIs or having endpoints that you can call in real time. And sometimes the older applications, they have to live with file-based exchange. And that might be characterizing your situation there. So I'll answer at the beginning, but I'll let Mike and Jessalyn also have an opportunity to speak. So absolutely, Workato is a great application modernizer, actually, because it can actually hide some of the legacy aspects of older applications that might be hiding behind files, or even on-premise applications. Workato has tools that allow you to automate right to your application. You're not limited by just cloud applications in terms of talking to databases. Any on-prem applications, Workato has capabilities to talk to. Mike, I'm going to ask you, do you have any feedback in terms of any applications that you've worked with, which maybe not quite as modern as the stack that we're starting to see nowadays that you've had to deal with, and what's been your experience there?
Yeah, so I would say that the concepts still remain the same, and it doesn't really matter which applications you have. You can still use Workato to kind of make all these systems talk to each other. So for us personally, we have a lot of different systems, and sometimes we are able to connect via API, and sometimes we aren't. So we need to do SFTP and other ways to pass the data. So for us, we haven't had any limitations.
Right. Any thoughts on your side at all, Jessalyn, on that topic about more legacy applications that you've seen before?
Not particularly more to add to legacy applications, but actually to legacy in the sense that we outgrew applications. So things that worked for us at a certain size, then as we've grown and scaled, we started to realize that we were meeting sort of their capacity for things. So one of those is actually Gusto that we've used historically for payroll. And we had a sync with Gusto in our HRMS. And at a certain point, because of the amount of data and the way things were set up, it stopped working the way that we were expecting it to work. And that was kind of known and expected. And we needed to grow into a new system. But we were in kind of that awkward middle phase where you've outgrown the old, but you're not yet ready to buy on the new. And so Workato helped us automate aspects of that and really track to make sure we had integritous data to kind of help us through that awkward limbo phase.
Oh, that's excellent. That's a really good point. People often forget that legacy doesn't necessarily mean old. It could just mean outgrown. I think that's a really, really great perspective, and I'm gonna steal that. I'll be perfectly honest. So that's cool. So I have another really great question, and I'm gonna tee you up, Jessalyn, for this one. This one here is the question is: we don't have very tech-savvy people in our HR function. I can't believe our HR people could use Workato. What kind of skills are needed? So I'll start with you, Jessalyn. I'll go to you, Mike, after that, and then I'll add my 2 cents after you, Mike. So do you want to start on that, Jessalyn?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. We are not particularly tech savvy either. We're all people who have sort of either a human resource background or a psychology background. We don't have engineering or tech backgrounds. The person actually on our HR team that does the most, our people ops team actually, that does the most around recipe building, she actually came from a background in retail. And what I've seen really help her to create recipes and leverage Workato has been, number one, she does have a process-oriented mind, which I think is pretty common to find in a people ops HR sort of organization. So she's process-oriented. She then also has experience in the sense that she's gone through these day-to-day business cases or problems. So she knows what are the main pieces that are the problems and the main things that we want to see happen. So she's got that experience from an HR background. And then the last piece is, and this is something that, keep in mind, you can develop, even if it's not your nature, but she has a growth-oriented mindset. So tech isn't necessarily her background, or maybe shouldn't be her forte, but she is very well-versed, experienced, and rewarded for trying things, experimenting, and then iterating and improving over time. And we've noticed with her, she applies her creativity and has developed increasingly more confidence to just try new things. And so those are really the skills that I see being the most useful when it comes to Workato. That's my perspective.
Right on. Mike, what's your perspective on terms of what are the entry level skills to get started?
Yeah, so great question. I do think that you don't always have to go the route of actually digging into Workato yourselves. There is some level of technical getting started, I would say. And we do have people on our team that do work on it, but we also have decided that maybe it's a better investment to bring in outside people as well. So we work with a vendor that helps us manage a lot of our Workato applications. But it is like an effort, a joint effort, where some people who use the tool from our team work with the outsourced help.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so I'll share my perspective too, just as a partner and an organization that actually focuses on helping organizations implement Workato. I'm going to come back to what you said there, Jessalyn, too. Especially, you said she was trying things. Your analyst, your business analyst, was trying things, and I think that actually is the key, in that it provides a platform where the risk of trying things is actually very low. And as people, we learn best by doing. We learn when we try things. We learn when we experiment. And our experience has followed that very closely as well. Our best developers are people who are business oriented, process oriented, understand business, understand those problems, and then know how to translate those into some of the more technical aspects. But really the barriers to entry are low. And I think it really comes down to that the risk of trying things is very, very low, and it's easy to approach. To speak to Mike's point, what we do provide as an organization, as a partner organization, are things like QA processes, because your data is important. You want to make sure that your data is treated, that small data is understood. So you want to make sure your processes are tested. Project management, so that you have a plan, that you know how to get from a vision to a deliverable. And those things, well, in the middle, that the team is iterating and working closely with the business process owners to deliver the outcomes. Having that professional methodology to deliver the solution end to end is something that Dispatch likes to do, and supports organizations wanting to upskill themselves as well. So I think we work together very well with that. Are there any other questions just out in the audience today that are looking for some feedback from the panel today? I'll just give it just a moment. While you're, while people are waiting to, provide or think of some questions, a couple of questions I have kind of in my back pocket for you, Jessalyn and Mike, is, we're used to IT projects being these very big, long, 6-month-long processes. What is a typical duration of an automation project? Is it measured in days, weeks, months? What's the cycle that you see? Michael, maybe start with you.
Yeah, so I think I touched on earlier that the automation project is one big project that never ends, because you should always be trying to make your business more scalable and more efficient. So in our case, though, for some sort of unit of measurement, we have looked at all the things we want to accomplish over the next maybe couple years and created phases, right? So we have a phase where it might just be US onboarding. The next phase might be global onboarding. And then the phase after that might be integrating all our systems to our HRIS. So we work in these increments. And then obviously we were very excited when we finish each one. So duration, I think that depends on the complexity that you have in each phase. So for us, our phase 1 took a few months. But I think because we put in a lot of the legwork and groundwork in phase 1, our phase 2 could be a lot quicker because of that.
Right, right. And Jesslyn, from your perspective, when you guys worked on the automation for, those notifications and the scorecard reminders, how big, how heavy of a project was that?
Yeah, good question. I think to Mike's point, it does depend, and it depends on how much sort of background work you've already gotten done and how much you already understand what it is that you're looking to do. So what we do, just from like a project management standpoint and to just pace ourselves, is we usually have quarterly objectives that are, generally speaking, just our OKRs, but then specific recipes that we want to be able to build within a particular quarter. Those will end up being sort of certain chunks. Again, the time ranges, but that particular automation that we put together, we talked about it, and then 2 weeks later, we had an initial draft to be able to run through. And since then, we, as Mike said, we continuously update it when things are not quite working the way that we want to. But it was a pretty short process, all in all, from beginning of the idea to the end of it.
Oh, fantastic. So I have another question that's here, which is an excellent question. So how do we learn more about Workato and whether it would work for us? So that's super easy. You have everybody you need on the phone today. So there's a couple of different things. You can reach out directly to myself as part of the panelist team. We have really, the entire Workato website has an enormous amount of resources available for learning more about Workato, looking at the various use cases, looking at the various scenarios that can be leveraged, and then finally, it's as simple as clicking a contact me button, and there'll be someone very easy and close at hand to answer any of your questions and set up a demo. Really, to even take you through a real life example with your own systems to show you how it can be leveraged in your environment. So that's great. I think, are there any other questions that people have in the audience today? Give people just another moment to ask. Otherwise, I wanted to thank Jesslyn and Mike for attending this really interesting conversation today. I think a couple of the takeaways are, again, Workato is about being responsive to business outcomes, not about the technology. The technology gets out of the way and allows you to implement your business goals in a manner that meets your needs. Any last thoughts, Jesslyn and Mike, before we wrap for today?
I was just going to say, my last thought is really just if you have Workato or if you're considering Workato, for me, one of the biggest things that I try to do is I ask myself for everything that we're doing, is this something we should automate, or is this something that requires a human touch? And more often than not, I find that we can automate it so that the times that we have the sort of human interfaces, that those can be better and more impactful because we're able to focus on that. I think those are my main points. And Mike, I've really enjoyed speaking with you and hearing about how you're using it at your organization. Actually, offline, I'd love to chat with you more because we're continuously iterating and trying to improve the way that we leverage it. So I'd love to collaborate with you on that.
Yeah, that sounds great. We should definitely do that.
And very good. Well, thank you. Thank you both of you for taking your time today to have this conversation. Thanks to Nicholas and Aaron for organizing today's discussion. And thank you to all the attendees who've taken time out of their day to spend some precious time listening to this conversation. And I hope that you've been able to take some valuable insights away from today's conversation. And we look forward to connecting with all those who are interested.
Outstanding. Well, thanks all, Gavin, for hosting, and then the panelists. And then, as a last reminder, we've recorded this session, and we'll push this out to the attendees for further review if you had any interruptions or would like to review it one last time. All right. Well, thanks all.
Very good.
Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you out there.
Thanks all.
Very good. Take care, everybody.